The Jamie Dyer Show.
Jeremy Roadruck, what's your passion?
My passion, really, there's for me what I love to do, and then there's what I love to do for other people. And for me, it's about learning and understanding how everything connects together. Because the more I learn, the more I'm able to learn and associate and connect. And one little thing over here, and I can like in my brain, it's a direct line to somewhere way over there. And for other people, it's like the most random, crazy. How did you ever make that association? And to me, it's a total straight line. And then for other people, it is about helping, really, it's about helping parents and kids get on the same page and play a better game with each other and tell a better story. Because a lot of it, and they didn't have the tools. And the parents, the adults around them didn't have the tools to recognize what was going on either. So, we're living these patterns of unresolved stuff, or we took ownership of the things in the adult lives around us, and somehow we blamed ourselves, and it's my fault that you're not happy in your marriage, and I'm not enough. And so, kids take ownership of a bunch of belief systems, and then we run these patterns, and our behavior is driven from that, often unconsciously. So the thing I've realized is if we want to make the world a better place, it really starts with getting just families and kids on the same page and playing with each other. Because go out into the world and try to change geopolitics, that's a pretty big shift. But if you could help your kids create their own emotional safety, assert and respect boundaries, have the confidence to speak up, you give them those basic skills, the world changes. Because they don't allow abuse to continue, they don't allow negative stuff. You're going to help me to feel small, sad, and cold. Why are we friends? And your kids can have the confidence to look, I don't need you. I can find other friends. I can make other situations. That's how the world heals and shifts and changes. Versus, let me go fix everything out there and then I'll be happy in here. Reverse the script, get happy inside, and then it's easier to start influencing because you're coming from a different energy source.
Do you find that maybe in some places children aren't taught to speak out?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's what I call positional authority, right? And I'm mom, I'm dad, I pay the bills. You have to shut up and listen to me. And that works only until your kids hit puberty, go through a significant emotional event. When your kids begin to become their own person and have their own ideas, they begin to push back. And you can't control them forever. So in my experience, and I've been working with families for a quarter of a century, since you can't suppress them forever, don't even bother starting. Just guide them, right? Let your kids be your teacher. You be their guardian and guide, and then you can play a different game. And I don't need to tell my kids what to do. I can ask questions, and they can figure out for themselves what they should do or what they shouldn't do or where they want to go. My daughter wants screen time, and so she's being a pain in the butt. Hey, kid, is that going to take you towards screen time or away from screen time? Do you want to keep going this direction, or do you want to change? Take a deep breath, breathe with me. Let's just get centered. Now, is it really that important? Should you just eat your vegetables?
Yeah, I think it is. It's a two-way thing, and I think it's something that families perhaps struggle with at times, depending. I mean, where did this interest for you come from? When did it start?
Well, I unfortunately was abused at 5 and 6. And I was living in Saudi Arabia, and I was abused by a security guard. And then we came back to the United States. And then a year later, I was abused by some kids up the street. And that kind of fractures a person. And so I changed at 5, 6 years old. I moved out of that positional authority because I said so, be a good boy, what I call a child brain. And I moved into a teenage brain. And so I began my midlife crisis at 6 because what are we here? Why are we here? What's our purpose? What's our fate? Why do people say one thing, do another, but mean a third thing? Like I became aware of that, and I wasn't emotionally equipped to process it. And then for me, before the abuse, I was already a crazy kid. Like I was raised on a leash. I was pulled out of traffic to stop me from being killed because I was so curious about everything. We lived in Turkey. I was 4 years old. I climbed on the roof of the house using a tree in the backyard. Like I loved life and wanted to engage and know everything. So I was this crazy energy source. And then the trauma amplified that. And so at 7 years old, I realized I'm playing tic-tac-toe. And for me, it's life and death. Like if I lose, I'm going to die. Like that's completely unconscious. But I realized the level of intensity I brought to everything was scaring the kids around me. So I had to pull back, and I became a very good mimic and a very good, I would study the people around me and what do I need to be safe in this moment. So I kind of became a chameleon, I became a mimic, and I learned to play with my behavior to just keep me, leave me alone. Because there's a lot of stuff in me about I'm not worth anything, I deserve to be punished. Like a lot of times when kids go through trauma, they internalize that on some level they believe they deserve the way they were treated is the only way to rationalize it. And so that becomes an unconscious, I'm worthless and useless and need to be punished. So that drives a person. But also at the same time, there was a part of me like, I want to protect and I want to help people because the empathy had started before I was abused. So I didn't go like the sociopathy route or the narcissist route. I had empathy for other people. I just didn't know what to do with it. And so I'm in this constant state of struggle internally. And I started to realize like just other people struggled with stuff and I could be a resource and I could help support and encourage because I knew what it was like to be rejected and to be in pain. And so like my whole teenage years was just diving deep into society. I was doing cross-cultural religious studies at 12, just constantly. Back then I would have said, I hate not knowing XYZ. Today I would say I love knowing about XYZ because that was the truth is I love having the answers and I love being able to contribute and help and support because I know what it's like to be unsupported and to feel like you're alone and literally your back is against the wall. You can't trust anyone. So for me, it's very easy to accept people where they are because your past brought you to this moment. What you do now is going to take you somewhere else. Where do you want to go? Right. So the same thing with my daughter. And do you want to eat your vegetables and get screen time? Do you want to fight about this? And this is the hill you're going to die on today. And no screen time. And we'll finish dinner and you'll just have to have quiet time and then go to bed and we won't do stories. Your choice. I'm just here to facilitate, babe. And so being able to provide that for other people, because so many people are in judgment of themselves and others, and there's no acceptance, there's no peace. So being able to just kind of hear them, what I call the 6 golden tickets, see, hear, feel, understand, appreciate, and then you can offer support.
Yeah.
If you try to do support without the other 5, you're dead.
I mean, I'm really sorry to hear about what happened to you, your experiences. You can answer this, you can choose to answer this, you can skip over it, it's completely fine. But when do you feel like you personally came to the end of that journey, like accepted it, or at least went past it in the same way that you're explaining about other people?
It was 11 years ago. I had 20 years of anger. And then I had about, as the memory started to come back to consciousness, I had about 10 more years of digging through what was going on and why. And I went through a series of personal development seminars. I did a lot of deep work. And I went to, it was Date with Destiny with Tony Robbins in California. And it's a 6-day workshop and it's crazy awesome. And part of that was, everybody has a primary question. We all have a question that we're constantly asking ourselves that's completely very, very deep inside us. And all of our behavior, all of our everything is to get to the answer of that question. And so he does some work to kind of get to that primary question. The cool part is once you become aware, you can choose a different question. And then there's tools and exercises we did to install that into our unconscious. But the other part of that was, what was your earliest memory? And for me, it was the abuse at 5. And then he asked a really important question, which is, what was happening right before that earliest memory? And all of a sudden, I remembered myself at 5 years old before I went outside the security gate, because we lived in a military installation in Saudi Arabia. My dad was part of a mission. And I went out past the sand dunes and past the security gate. So what was I doing before that? Oh, I was playing in the sand dunes. And this is where me and my friends, we were building things and, we would dig tunnels and we would play games. We had all these really cool, because it was just the overflow of where construction was being done, where they dumped all the sand piles so you could like move it around and stuff. And so that became my newest memory. And it's like, dude, that's the coolest thing. Like I was in this great space of creativity and connection to this higher sense of everything. And like I really, that was one of the big steps to coming home. And then a year later, I went through some work with a guy named Steve Linder, and I actually picked up master level certifications in neurolinguistic programming, hypnotherapy, and NeuroStrategist. And we did an exercise called parts integration. And there you take different, sometimes you feel like there's parts of you arguing inside yourself. Well, you can personify that stuff and you can make them become friends, because both of those sides are attempting to serve a higher purpose inside of you, but they're arguing about ways to get there. And so a dear friend of mine, Julie, took me through an exercise as part of her certification. And it took a while to like, it didn't feel like it to me, but evidently I sat there for 45 minutes right at the brink of integration and just sat there. And finally, like, she had a moment of insight and used Calvin and Hobbes, which is a great characters for the cartoon here in the US. And that like clicked. And then it was like this feeling of being home. And I hadn't had that in like over 3 decades. And so that moment, like a friend of mine was watching and was like, you had a look on your face. I like didn't recognize you. You look so happy and peaceful and like angelic. And I was like, dude, I wish you got a picture of that. But like, that was the moment. And then after that, it's just the story has shifted. And I'm not sorry for what happened. I would not wish that on anyone. And I do everything I can. I'm a Kung Fu master. I do things to help protect people from ever having that type of experience. But I see it as a huge gift because it drove me into a space. And yeah, I spent 30 years dealing with it all. But now on the other side of that, what an amazing awareness to have for other people who've been through trauma. Because if I stayed who I was before I was traumatized, I wouldn't understand people because I was at such an emotional place. There's stuff that just would have been bulletproof. I never would have touched me, or I would never have been upset about, or I wouldn't be able to relate to it. So for me and my story, I had to go down into that pit to bounce out of it, because now if I could go, 1 million units negative, that's awesome, because now I can go 1 million units positive. I have a 2 million unit of energy range that little kid that I was way back when would have been different. I couldn't have understood the negative side. I would have just been confused by it. So I don't wish that experience on anyone. But for me, I wouldn't take it away because my daughter wouldn't be here without it. My wife wouldn't be with me without it.
Yeah, it is your experiences that shape you. And I know that, it leads on to what you go on to do. So, like you say, you leave the experience where it is and move on from it and take some of the lessons learned from it and go forward. And it sounds like you've done that. You're an author. Tell us a little bit about some of your books that you've written.
The first book I wrote was The Kung Fu Kitties, The Adventure Begins, and that's part of a series of 5, and I haven't written the rest of them yet. But the first one, it was a tool for my students to help explain kind of what we do in the martial arts school over the first 5 weeks. And so I made it into a little story about some cats that I had rescued and using those as metaphors, because, it's not about stuff. It's about the stories we create about the stuff. And so having a way to kind of go into some of the cooler concepts and introduce that in a story, that was the idea there. And then a few years later, that was like 2008. And then in 2012, I wrote Your Best Child Ever Is This Game Worth Winning? Because I just kept seeing the same struggles and the same patterns in families, right? Kids come in. Usually parents want their kids either improve their confidence or improve their discipline. They have enough confidence, they need more discipline. They have enough discipline, they need more confidence. That's generally what I see. And you could break that introvert, extrovert. But a lot of times I see the kids aren't the problem. And the parents aren't really the problem either, because I see the parents with a lot of love. They don't have great tools. And so if we could just tweak a couple things, let's get some clarity, let's improve some confidence and change how you communicate. And once we do that, like, your kids respond to you differently, understanding influence versus positional authority. That's huge. And how do you transition a child into a teenager safely, successfully, in a way that you like each other versus my ignorant, stupid kid is such a jerk and they're so selfish and so lazy. Well, gee, if you approach them with that attitude, I wonder why they push back. Because if your boss came at you like that, what would you do? And the parents go, oh, hadn't thought of it like that. I was like, yeah, that's why I wrote the book. And so, money back guarantee. It's the only parenting book I know of with a money back guarantee. Written by a guy at the time. I was single, wasn't married, wasn't dating, and didn't have kids. But I had 17 years of working with kids, plus my own trauma since 9. So that put me at 17 years. I would have had 26 years of working with families and kids, including myself.
And that is certainly some experience behind you. there.
Hmm.
I mean, the ways in which these things are done, I mean, it must have changed, certainly. Have you written something and then maybe 5, 10 years down the line, is some of it a little bit outdated now, or does it tend to be quite universal and timeless?
Yeah, with your best child ever, it's universal.
Hmm.
I've gone back and read it. My wife is actually reading it right now, just to kind of go back through it again, and yeah, because it's all we break it into. There's principles, which are kind of universal things that it doesn't matter time and place. But then there's concepts, and concepts are changeable because concepts exist inside your head, and they're ideas about stuff. But like principles don't change. And so when you begin to understand like brain development and morphology, how neurostructures line up and link up, like that stuff doesn't change. But the sequence within an individual is unique. And if a kid pivots into a teenage brain before they're emotionally ready, I lived that. There are predictable patterns that show up. I just talked to a dad who's got a 6-year-old who, up until a couple of days ago, was living with mom and has been moved at least 8 times with mom, had at least 8 different men in this 6-year-old's life. And dad, after 2 days with his new son, he finally has full access to his son, but the 6-year-old is swearing. He is threatening to kill himself, threatening to kill other people. And dad's like in panic mode because he's got a 6-year-old who's like, well, he's suicidal and he's depressed. And is he? Or is he using a pattern of language and taboo words to spark an emotional response in the adults around him? Right? Because if he says, I'm going to kill myself, all the adults go into panic. What a great tool to give to a 6-year-old. Yikes.
Yeah, they probably don't understand kind of, we all said phrases when we were younger that maybe we didn't quite understand,
Exactly.
and like you say, adults would panic and you go, well, I don't actually mean it because I don't know what it really means, what the repercussions
Right.
of it are. I mean, a lot of time they say these days that kids grow up a little bit too
Mhm.
soon, mainly because of phones and tablets and such.
Well, to be fair, childhood as a concept in Western society only happened because of Victorian England. Right? Because of child labor laws, you have a surplus population that can't work. And the problem was they had kids going up in the chimneys to clean the chimneys out, getting stuck and dying. And that was kind of bad. And then they kind of made these rules. And now you got all these kids who can't work. What are we going to do with them? And that's kind of where childhood is a concept. Because prior to that, most of the human consciousness, most human societies, we lived in a subsistence kind of thing where kids had to work and you had to farm or you had to produce. Unless you were like super elite in the aristocracy or royalty, kids had to work. You were 4 years old. You're mucking the pigs, or you're getting eggs, or you're drawing water, or you're collecting sticks for the fire tonight so we don't die because it's too cold outside. Like kids had purpose and utility. And then child labor laws, you can't work because you're so young and so small and so whatever. Now all of a sudden, and that's really where a lot of the research, it's only been the last 150 years that we've really had childhood as a concept. So we're still unpacking how do people develop and how do they socialize. And Jung did some great work on archetypes and the collective unconscious and the individual unconscious. I mean, there's so much stuff going on that we just don't know. So we say kids age. I'm like, well, I don't know. Raise a kid during the Black Death and people were stacked up like cordwood outside the house, and tell me kids mature too fast or too young. I don't know that that's true or not. Or go back to Hellenistic periods when, for a lot of the ancient Greeks, and we look to them for a lot of knowledge and wisdom, but they also had very different sexual mores with children than we do. So, be careful what hill you want to die on with ascribing status to things. I'm a big fan of we are where we are versus, well, it's supposed to be or it should be. I'm like, well, but if we dig into that, it gets a little messy quick.
I think one problem we have these days, and well, it's probably not a problem, it's just something that we do. We tend to look back at the past and we judge it by our modern
Yeah.
standards.
Well, yeah. Ethnocentrism is an awesome thing.
That is very true. Well, it sounds like, you're really passionate about what it is that you do and obviously write it. So how many books are there now?
Currently, there's 2, and I have like 9 more inside.
Awesome. More inside. So are you writing notes all the time, or is it literally just coming out of you?
I have the Kung Fu Kitties is a series of 5, and I already have kind of the basic structures in place. I just haven't sat down to do it. I haven't had the drive for that. And then Your Best Child Ever has a sequel, though. Is this game worth winning. Game is all about behavior. And then the sequel to that is this story worth telling, which is all about justification, right? Because if you can figure those two things out, all kids play games and all kids tell stories. It doesn't matter how old the kid is, right? Geopolitics is what? It's games and it's stories. Now, is it a win-win that's going to keep humanity moving forward? Or is it a win-lose, which will collapse given enough time? It always does. Whether it's an intimate relationship or it's politics or religion, anything that is win, lose, lose, win, lose will always fail. Stretch the timeline long enough. Look at any point in human history. If it's not win-win, it'll collapse. So the stories, why do we tell stories? Why do they persist for as long as they do? And I found there's really only 4 reasons to tell a story. And then once you begin to understand that, then you can look at, well, how are the archetypes showing up? Because we have different personas and personalities. So I'm working with a client one-on-one right now, and he's realized, just use the 4 main ones, the king, the lover, the wizard, and the warrior. And he's realized he's living in the wizard, and the wizard is controlling the king, and it's controlling the lover, and it's controlling the warrior. And because of that, it's very easy for him to get into patterns of utility. He comes home, he gets the house clean and organized, he gets this, he gets this. It's easy to go sideways into conversations with people and not really deal with himself, but he's not living his best quality of life because the king's been asleep. So how do we wake the king up? How do we get the king to show up more powerfully? And he did some really cool work over the weekend, not talking to people and taking a couple of days out in the woods by himself and camping. So, just figuring out the story we tell and the way we can play with those different metaphors inside of us. There's no amount of trying to fix things outside that's going to resolve the stuff inside. And that's what we call living at effect. Let me fix everything out there first, and then I'll be happy. Well, that's effect, because you can't control the weather. And if it has to be beautiful and sunshiny, or I'm not happy, you're in for a life of misery because we can't control the weather all the time. But you can control your attitude towards the weather. That you can control 100%. And so it's, how do we get people to get to cause? How do you raise your kids to be at cause? Right? A lot of adults, they're like, well, how do I discipline my kid? And I'm like, you mean punish? Because discipline is a skill, not an act. And they're like, oh, they had never thought of it.
No. What do you think is kind of the first step towards that then? What is your opinion on that?
It's always awareness, because awareness is a key that opens new doors. You got to walk through it and have the ability to turn the handle, and there's some other steps. But you can't fix a problem or change a situation if you're not aware of what's going on. Aware you have a choice. Just because you were raised a certain way, right? I have Irish in my background. My mom's last name was O'Brien. So does that mean I have to be a drunk who loves to fight? Because if you've read how the Irish saved Western civilization, they were also amazing storytellers. And the monks wrote down a lot of the knowledge and history and preserved it. So if I'm going to take one side of my Irish ancestry, I got to take the other side too, which is the scholars and the wise men and the monks who preserved. You know what I mean? So that awareness is the first step, because you can't pivot something, you can't move something if you're not aware.
No. What do you think is the step towards awareness then?
The first step really is when you start to notice friction or pushback or that internal tension. That's usually a sign something's not going as well as it could. Because like with fighting, when you hit somebody in the right time, in the right place with the right energy, it's literally effortless. It's like the universe aligned and you just nailed them. You didn't hit them. They walked into your time and space. It's a different way of thinking. And so whenever you feel that push and your rules, it shouldn't be this hard. It shouldn't be this difficult. I shouldn't have to work this. There's an opportunity there to pivot something, because that friction is an opportunity to learn. And is that a feather? That's a light touch saying, hey, you might want to notice this. Is that a brick through your windshield? Or is that a freight train or a Mack truck smashing you? So those different levels of intensity, because you don't deal with stuff, it comes back and it brings friends. And then you don't deal with it, it brings more friends. Because, Victor Hugo has a great line. The one thing more powerful than all the armies of the world is an idea whose time has come. And when it's time for you to pivot and shift and expand, the universe is going to keep bringing that lesson back, and it's going to hammer on you, and you either pivot, numb yourself, or kill yourself, existentially or metaphysically or metaphorically or literally. because it's like, here's the opportunity to be something greater. No, I'm not ready. I don't deserve this. I'm too scared. I'm too busy. It'll come back with added force. And the consequences get bigger too if you keep delaying. So that pressure, that tension, that uncomfortable, that's that opportunity to gain some awareness. And that's, you can ask questions. What's wrong with? That'll produce an answer. What could I learn from this? That produces a different answer.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and just talking to you, I can relate to a lot of what you're saying, and I find it really fascinating. To plug your book for a second, your books. Where can people buy them?
Amazon, or you can get right now. The one I have out is Your Best Child Ever, and that's the only parenting book I know of in the entire world with a money back guarantee, because it works, and you can get it on Amazon. You can buy it. That's nice. Thank you. You can also go to my website, theparentingprogram.com, and you can download a PDF for free. Because I've gotten to the point where I want the message to get out more than I care about making a couple of dollars. Because I sell the book, I don't make a whole lot of money on it. One book sale is not going to transform my life, but a family getting a hold of this information, actioning it, it will transform your family. I guarantee it. Because so I want to get the info out. I want this information out into the world. That's why I do the podcast. That's why I do interviews like this, because there's just so much pain and it's not getting better. Okay, I have a tool. Let's get it. How can I get a bigger exposure to that? So theparentingprogram.com, just drop in your email so we can carry on a conversation if you'd like. But yeah, it takes you, as soon as you put it in, it takes you to the next page as a PDF. You can just download it, right click save, and it's yours.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure that many people will. I'll certainly be taking a look at that. And Jeremy, thank you for appearing on the podcast.
It's been my pleasure, Jamie.
The Jamie Dyer Show.